Good morning, my dear friend. Today's episode is special for me because it is not being watched by the you people only, but also the goods and the greats of my field of study have also kindly consented to watch and not only watch but evaluate. So while I am among you or before you, I feel quite at ease. But while I am being scrutinized by the great persons of my field, I am also feeling to be in a hot seat. And that's why I am looking somewhat tentative today. Nevertheless, we will try and see how to perform the best, how to prepare a potpourri of the different aspects of the global warming, and how this stream evanesces from the opening of the potpourri, spreading the fragrance of the knowledge. To give an idea about the goods and greats, the people with whom I have prayed with folded hands that please have a look at me, sir, and they have kindly consented is none other than the great Professor Sunil Saran, who was a professor of eminence in botany at Patna University, and later on joined the academic administration as the chancellor of the Amity University. Then is Professor Pashupati Nath, who is also a known professor of geology and a prolific commentator, you can say, having a cervic pain too. He doesn't hesitate in calling a spade a spade. And then Professor Santosh Kumar of our university, the former head of the botany department. So these people, along with Professor Ashok Singh, have kindly consented to watch this program and to evaluate for me and to guide me, holding my hands. They will show how to treat on this new forum. Then I am lamenting that I could not connect to my teacher, classroom teacher, and source of inspiration, and a known name in this field of environment biology. And he is none other than Professor R.K. Sinha, the Padma Shri Award winner. Since he had been elevated to the rank of the Vice Chancellor of Jammu University, Mata Vaishno Devi University, I could not connect him and I could not request him to uh, be with me while I'm presenting. So let me start with paying obeisance to all my teachers and love for all my students. Coming to my topic, the global warming, I have told you or related you different facts that how greenhouse gases are building up, how temperature is going up, and how this temperature is acting as a contributive factor in tipping the change in our climate and our climate, while which is the result of the atmosphere, cryosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, lithosphere. So these all spheres are interacting with each other, and this interaction is triggered in such a way that the climate is changing, and we have to cope up with the climate change. And this climate change, if not stalled, if not the progress is stalled, then we will have to face catastrophic consequences, and it will uh, touch almost all facets of our life, all right from agriculture, economy, the way we live in our society, the migration process. And it is not only that the human beings will be affected, but all the living animals and the plants, their very interaction is at stake, and the weather pattern is changing in such a way that it will trigger large scale migration, and that migration will heap havoc upon we people. So we should be alert about the climate change. We should, even those who are not uh, who do not belong to biology stream, they should also know much about the climate change, and they should also contribute their might in stalling the climate change or halting its progress at least. So coming to our topic and to the slide share, let's see. So the first slide is concerned with the urban heat islands, UHI, and the UHI, it might appear contrasting, paradoxical, that islands of heat. We have heard about mass of land surrounded by water is called island, but here in the eye of the urban areas, a mass of heat is trapped at the island called urban heat islands. Let's see how these islands are formed. So here you see that this solar radiation is impinging upon the high-rise buildings, and in between these buildings there are narrow blackened roads. So these blackened roads are acting as if they were canyons between the hillocks. So these concrete buildings, their nature has changed, and now instead of radiating the infrared radiation of the heat, the solar radiation impinging upon them is transformed into infrared longer wavelength radiation. And so this radiation, instead of being reflected to the outer atmosphere, you see the thicker arrow, it is showing that the heat is being absorbed. So this heat is being absorbed here and here too. And so this heat is building here as a heat mass. And this heat mass has raised the temperature of this area in comparison to the surrounding rural areas, because the rural areas don't have such high-rise buildings and it has plenty of vegetation which has cooling effect, and the plain surface of the rural area is reflecting the impinging solar radiation in the form of heat to the outer atmosphere, and so this heat is being returned and it is not being trapped. So here heat trapping between the high-rise buildings and canyons, that is roads, narrow roads encased in between them, is called urban heat islands. And mass scale migration from the rural to the urban areas had led to the haphazard springing up of high-rise buildings, and these high-rise buildings trap the heat, and it leads to further global warming, because to offset the heat, the inhabitants use energy such as AC and other electrical equipments. They consume energy, releasing more greenhouse gases. Plus, here also the greenhouse gases are being generated. That's why this urban heat island has a positive impact. That is, it emits positive feedback on the global warming, and it is aiding the global warming. Global warming is helping in the generation, is causing in the generation of the, rather it is hastening the generation of the urban heat islands, and urban heat islands in their turn is adding to the trapping of more heat and release of more greenhouse gases to offset the heat trapping, and thereby they are also contributing to more and more addition of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and thereby contributing to the global warming. So here you see there is a feedback effect, positive feedback. Next slide. The global warming and consequent climate change is leading to the shrinkage of biodiversity. That is, biodiversity is the species richness of a particular area. So the number of species are being threatened due to the rise in the temperature, and as per the IPCC's report, if there is a 1% rise in the temperature, about 10% of the species studied are being threatened. Similarly, if there is 1% rise in 1 degree, sorry, not 1%, 1 degree rise, if there is 1 degree rise in temperature, the climate is shifting, climatic zones are shifting about 100 miles. So this shifting of climatic zone is also contributing to the extinction of the species, and two particular types of species such as montane species and endemic species, they are more prone to the disappearance due to the global warming. The montane species are the species found in the mountainous region, in the mountainous terrain, upon some moderate height where plenty of precipitation is received, as well as the temperature is optimum for the growth of the vegetation. And so this is quite fertile region as far as the generation of the greenery is concerned. So these montane species, as the temperature global warming is happening, the climatic zone is shifting towards polewards and shifting towards the peaks, and the temperature in the peak is very low, and it is not congenial to the flourishing of the plant species. Similarly, endemic species, those species whose distribution is restricted to a shorter range, a very small area, such as in reptiles, you might have heard Sphenodon, the Rhynchocephalians, they are restricted to a very small area of the New Zealand. So if the climate changes in that area, they are threatened immediately. So the climate change or the rise in the global temperature has threatened species, particularly the montane species as well as endemic species. They are more threatened. Similarly, the poleward altitudinal shift I have discussed, and the flowering trees, etc., are also being affected because the timing of their emergence of eggs or the fertilization or the pollination is being shifted, and that is not congenial with the other factors. The next slide is concerned with the risk of extinction of species, and you see here, as I discussed in the earlier slide, that with the rise in the temperature, many species are on the verge of extinction. Their very existence on the earth is being threatened, and you see that nearly 40% amphibians, conifers 32 to 34%, and 25% mammals, they are being threatened towards extinction. But at this point, I would like to clarify that this data does not show extinction due to the climatic change. There are other factors also contributing. Nevertheless, they are facing extinction, so much of amphibians and this much of reptile and mammals. So a vast biodiversity, a vast constituent of our biodiversity is being threatened due to the climatic change, and this threatening will vacate the ecological niche in which they were performing a particular function, and that function will not be performed upon their extinction, and that will lead to the ultimate effect upon we people, because we are sitting at the top of the trophic level. I have talked about shifting of climatic zones. So these climatic zones shifting is more pronounced or can be gauged, and it is more visible in the tropical areas where the tropics are expanding, the dry areas are expanding as the subtropics are pushing them both northward as well as southward, whereas the intertropical convergence zone, which lies in the middle, which receives about 32% of the world's precipitation and which supports less green vegetation, is shrinking. So two contrasting processes are happening, and both are having the same results. While the tropics are expanding, they are leading to the expansion of the dry zones, whereas the intertropical convergence zone, which was supporting more and more forests due to the heavy precipitation, is shrinking, and its result is also the expansion of the drier zones, expansion of the arid zones. So these two processes are contrasting processes, expansion and the shrinking, but the result is ultimately the same. Both these two processes are resulting in the expansion of dry areas and shrinking of wet areas, and therefore a reduction of area under the green coverage. Let's see here. This slide shows this is the tropical area, and here this is dry area and this is the wet area as shown by this. So what happens in 1980 it was like this, but today what is happening? The dry area has expanded. This area has expanded this side as well as this side, because this subtropical area is pushing, it's expanding towards the Tropic of Capricorn as well as towards the Tropic of Cancer. So the expansion of arid zones is taking place in both north as well as the south, and that's why the desertification is taking place. And here in the middle there was intertropical convergence zone, and that zone was receiving much of the precipitation of the globe, and that was supporting the lush green forests and vegetations. But unfortunately this intertropical zone, interconvergence tropical zone is also shrinking, and that's why the area under the lush green forests and vegetation is shrinking. So here also expansion of arid zone, here shrinking of green area, the result to contrasting process, expansion and the shrinking, resulting in to the same result, that is the reduction of green cover. Then there is 100th meridian. This 100th meridian is a line, an imaginary line in the north area between the North America, between the eastern and the western regions of the North America. East of this 100th meridian is a wetter zone, where that is having lush green vegetation under good precipitation, whereas the west of this 100th meridian is a drier arid zone which is devoid of the vegetation and rich in the cacti and other xeric plantations. So what is happening, that this demarcating line between the east and the west areas of the North America, eastern green and western dry areas of the North America, is shifting towards eastward. That is, more and more areas of North America is being converted into arid zones. So let's see in the slide. Look here, the shifting 100th meridian. This is the North America region. Here is the 100th meridian, and east of the 100th meridian is lush green area, whereas the west of the 100th meridian is the arid zone. This was in 1980, whereas today you see that there is a marked shift in this 100 meridian towards the eastward. Here the 100th meridian is very near this line, but this 100 meridian in this diagram, it was in 1980, in this diagram it had shifted eastward. So this swath of land which was under green cover has now been desertified, and it has led to the expansion of the desertification, and that's a very grim prospect. You can see it leads to the climatic shift, it leads to the climatic zone shift, and the climatic zone shift. Now, what will happen that the animals inhabiting this area, they will have to migrate to this area for their survival. So this migration must take place if at all those organisms which were surviving in this area will have to survive. So animals may migrate swiftly, but how could the plants migrate? And if the plant migration of the plant is delayed, then it will lead to the extinction of the animals too. And that's why that shifting in the climatic zone is posing a bigger problem. Similarly, the vast expanse of Sahara Desert is near about the area of United States of America, 3.6 million square kilometers, vast swath of land without devoid of vegetation and arid climate having deserts. So this you see here the expanse in 1902, and in 2013 you see here that the Sahara expanded towards this side and this side too. So the expansion of Sahara means the desertification of more and more new areas, and it has been estimated that since 1902 about 10% more areas have been come under the Sahara influence, that is they have been desertified. So the green vegetation which were earlier occupied in those areas have now given way to the xeric environment, and they have been finished. Similarly, tornado hotspots are also shrinking. It is not shrinking, but it is changing space. That is, new hotspots are emerging. You know that global warming is leading to EWE, that is extreme weather events. And these weather events are extreme. Either there is no precipitation or there is a deluge. Either there is no wind or there are cyclones. More and more such areas are being affected by the cyclones which were not affected earlier, which had not seen the devastation of the cyclone earlier. So many new hotspots of tornadoes are appearing in the United States. We can have an idea of those hotspots by this comparative diagram. Between 30 years, between 1954 to 1983, tornadoes, these are the denser tornadoes, denser areas having more intense tornado. So these tornadoes were more frequent in this area. The more intense tornadoes were frequent in this area in 30 years between 1954 to 1983. Since 1984 to 2003, there had been a marked shifting in the heavy tornadoes in this denser area. You can discern that it has shifted from this side, stern side, to the stern side, and now new hot zones have appeared. So the shifting climatic zones have led to the appearance of more and more areas under the desertation. The expanding Sahara is engulfing more and more areas, and the tornado are taking new hot spots under its clutches. And so the vast population which didn't know what is the adverse impact of tornado are now regularly coming under the tornado. So shifting to the next slide. Whereas certain areas which were flourishing earlier will feel deficiency of water, and it will lead to the change in the vegetation pattern, and again the process you can call will lead to the shifting of the climatic zones, and since plant could not cope up with the shifting of the climatic zones, they will perish, they will undergo extinction, or the pattern, change of the pattern will lead to the water stress on certain plants. Then water facilities which we use for our purpose will also be affected by this process. More areas which were not prone to be come under flood, they will become flood prone. Their waterlogging may lead to the emergence of new diseases. Water quality will also be affected. So severe droughts and severe floods are the consequences of this global change in the climate. Impacts of the forest impacts, they are almost similar. So the habitat shift will affect the forest, the death and decay will lead to the accumulation of more and more carbon, which if not pushed underground or tackled in such a way, it will lead to the release of the carbon in the atmosphere. It will also aid to more greenhouse gases, and the atmosphere, which will become drier and more humid, it will promote insect proliferation, and this more multiplication and proliferation of insects will give fillip to the pest species, and so the forest as well as agricultural crops, they will be attacked by the pests, and this infestation, increased rate of infestation by the pests will decrease the agricultural production as well as adversely affect the forest of our land. These are the impacts: long growing season, carbon dioxide fertilization. Let me discuss these 2 points. When there is long growing season and carbon dioxide fertilization. What is carbon dioxide fertilization? When carbon dioxide is present in the atmosphere in a plenty, what will happen? That carbon dioxide will be used by the plants, and the plants will produce more and more food. So, how would it adversely affect the climate? How would it adversely affect our yield too? Then there is longer growing season. This longer growing season should also aid us, because more and more time will be available for harvesting a crop. But when we go into the details, what will happen? That this carbon fertilization will lead to this first let me deal with this longer growing season. What happens that in older areas, the springs are expanding, that is more and more time is under spring, and autumns are shrinking. So this shrinking of autumn and expanding of spring has led to more favorable time for the flourishment of the plant. Plant will enjoy that spring, its leaves will grow bigger and bigger, and the greenery will flourish. And similarly, availability of a plenty of carbon will lead to more and more food production by the plants, and their leaves and their girth will increase. So how these processes are adversely affecting us? That is a big question. So when we see that apparently these two appear to be helping us, but this growing season as well as fertilization of carbon will lead to more and more absorption of water from the area in which the plant was growing, and this will lead to water stress on the area. And since water level will go down, the area will become dry, and it will indirectly aid to the forest fire too. Then the shrinking autumn will not support whatever may be the extent, it will not support the flourishing, and so the precipitation is also going down. So cumulative effect of these factors will lead to the water stress, and when water is not available in plenty to the plant, will it be able to carry out photosynthesis? No, because it needs carbon dioxide plus water, and then carbohydrate is formed utilizing the solar energy. So water, even though carbon dioxide is present in plenty, even though solar radiation is present in plenty, but the precipitation pattern had changed. Water is not available that much, and what is available there will be absorbed by the plant for more and more growth, leading to the dry soil, and the dry soil and the dry conditions will ultimately promote or act as a catalytic factor for the emergence of forest fires, and these forest fires will add up tons and tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, in addition to devastating the forest resource of our country or of the world. So that is how apparently these two appear to be aiding to the plant growth, but these are ultimately detrimental to the growth of the plant and other factors. Then there is a forest pest and disease. As we have dealt with earlier, that the rising temperature and the humid conditions are favoring the proliferation of insects, the insect multiplication, and insects will be able to multiply in large number, and they will build up their population, and they will affect, many of them are phytophagous, and so they will affect the plant population, and so the cumulative effect, again I would say, will be to the detrimental of the plant growth. Again, coming to the invasive plants, what happens when this soil becomes drier, when the water level goes down, certain hardy plants which were not previously present in that location, they will succeed, such as ragweeds, etc. They will flourish in that region, and they will release their pollens, and those pollens will also cause what you say allergy, and so ultimately we are going to be adversely affected by all these factors, though apparently some of them may appear to be aiding the plant growth. Agricultural impacts, more or less the impacts on forest will be identical to the impacts on agriculture. First, shifting climatic patterns, weather patterns will lead to the unpredictability on uncertainty in the agriculture practices. You cannot be certain about the downfall, you cannot be certain about the rains, about the droughts, about the temperatures, and so even if you sow a traditional crop hoping it will rain, it won't rain, and the crop will be wilted away. So this unpredictability will kill the poor farmers, and they will try to shift from farming to some other vocations, and that would lead to the decline in the production of the food items, and it will also lead to the lesser availability of the food grains and rise in the prices, ultimately leading to the what you say devastation of the lower section of the society, those who are sitting on the margins. Then we have already seen the shifting climatic zones, proliferation of insects that we have discussed. So the ultimate impact of climate change on weather, on forest, on agriculture, on the water resources, they are interlinked. What will happen? That the water table will go down. What will happen? That the water precipitation will change. The area and coming under heavy rains will be deserted by the clouds, and the area which we are feeling heat of the sun will be facing over raining. You might have noticed the floods in the Jerik areas of Rajasthan, and these floods have led to the accumulation of water logging, and these water logging played a favorable atmosphere for the emergence of female Anopheles mosquitoes, and the areas of Rajasthan which were not known to malaria, they have been affected by the malaria in big waves, and many villages have been deserted due to the catastrophe of malaria. So the changes are so much interlinked that if one is appearing favorable, it will affect in reality unfavorable way, and that's how the negative impact ultimately will bite we people, the human beings. So those changes are being summarized in this diagram. Climate change impacts, change in the weather patterns, cyclone disturbances, sea level rise, and all others and others. Human health we have dealt in the first portion. Now, how the agriculture sector is contributing to the global warming. You see, on the face of it, it appears that we farmers or our farmers are the saviors of the greenery. They are cropping green crops, and this greenery will help in the conservation of the environment. But when we dissect into the effects, we encounter these problems. You see that rice cultivation is contributing about 23% to the climate change, and enteric fermentation. I have earlier mentioned this topic too, that America, United States is forcing us to reduce the number of cattle heads. So animal husbandry is a big employment giving sector for our downtrodden section of society and for our farmers. You see that the animals, you imagine the image of a cow, and you see that cow keeps on ruminating, and the force of gases line its sides of the mouth. So this ruminants, the animal group which ruminate, which have a ruminating component in their stomach, and it regurgitates its food occasionally and ruminate it in the mouth to digest the chlorophyll symbiotically. So this rumination leads to the formation of methane in a big way, and this methane is acting as a greenhouse gas, as you have seen in my earlier classes, and it is contributing to the global warming in a big way. So emission from soil is also emitting methane as well as carbon dioxide. Manures, which we use nitrogen fertilizers, leading to the emergence of nitrogen oxides into the environment, and carbon containing fertilizers lead to the emergence of carbon dioxide also. So leaching and emergence of these gases will add to the greenhouse gas content. Rice cultivation, again there is a big problem. The waterlogged areas also lead to the emission of methane, and methane, you have seen, has got more potentiality to trap it than the carbon dioxide, and the only saving grace is that methane is destructible in the atmosphere in a very short span of time compared to carbon dioxide, and that's why it is not contributing to the level of the carbon dioxide. Nevertheless, we will have to contain the emission of the methane, and since we are a rice producing nation, we produce rice in a big way. The global contribution of rice is being made by the India, China, and these states, these nations. So the area under rice cultivation will lead to waterlogging, and waterlogging will lead to the emergence of methane gas in the environment, and this methane gas will cause global warming. So the crop residues, the carbon residue of the crops, they will accumulate, and they will also be leached away into the environment. So we see that the agriculture sector, which we were catering and we were treating that the agriculture sector is not that pollution causing, rather it may prove to be the sink of the pollution causing gases, is contributing to the pollution in many ways, and that's why the developed countries are putting pressure upon us that we should put cap on the emergence of the greenhouse gases from the agricultural sector and from the animal husbandry sector. We should reduce the number of cattle heads, and we should also reduce the area under cultivation of rice. But you see, this is an unjust demand, because being a developing country, we will have to be a big population and a vast sector of population living marginally. So we will have to give fillip to the food production, and if food grain production is reduced, it will lead to hunger. It will lead to the devastation of a vast production, vast population, and it will lead to death due to the hunger and destitution. So you cannot, when you are utilizing more and more energy, and when you are spewing out more and more greenhouse gases in the environment, you should not put pressure on a developing country without transferring the environment friendly technology. You should ease the transfer of environment friendly technology, and so the north-south cooperation should be given fillip. If we have to stall the environmental change, if we have to stall the greenhouse gas effect, if we have to deal with the climate change in an effective way. Otherwise, forcing us or gesticulating at us or playing a big brotherly role will not yield any result, and that would be a sheer travesty of justice. Then the impact on oceans. Impact of oceans, I have euphemistically titled is Blue of the Blue. Blue, I am meaning here by oceans, and the blues, the problems which is being faced by the ocean. So blues of the blues is a causing big problem, and it is also contributing to the climate change in a big way. So what is the role of ocean in our climate? Oceans are most important, rather the biggest buffer zone against the climate change. They have the largest storage of carbon dioxide, and they have the capability to absorb as much as 25% of the excess carbon dioxide and as much as 90% of the excess heat generated by the process of the global warming. So this absorption is reaching its threshold value, that is, the ocean is not able to accommodate more and more of our sins. That is, it is not able to absorb any more carbon dioxide. It is reaching saturation point, and that's why the dissolution of the carbon dioxide into the oceanic water is also leading to the increase in the acidity of the oceanic water, and that's why this acidity will have far-reaching consequences for the oceanic fauna. Then ocean is also expanding, that is, ocean level of the oceanic water is gradually rising. The global warming is leading to the rise in the temperature. This rise in the temperature is expanding the oceanic water, and the global warming is also leading to the halving of permafrost, that is, the areas which were permanently under the glaciers, they were under the frozen water, they are getting melted, and this meltdown is resulting into the flow of water from the peak towards the bottom, flooding the rivers, and ultimately rivers are emptying their content into the ocean, and the ocean is gradually rising. The rise in the level of ocean, it will play devastation. It will have catastrophic consequences for a vast section of population, because many areas, about 2/3 or more population resides within 100 kilometers. Half of the population, it's not 2/3, but about half of the population resides within the radius of the 100 kilometer of the seashore, and when the sea level will go up, it will lead to the inundation of that area, those areas, and it will lead to the shifting of the population, a humongous task which most of the nations will not able to carry out, because many of them are developing countries such as Bangladesh, Maldives, and many coastal areas of India too. So that would be a human problem. And another problem is that the areas, coastal areas, are fertile areas. They are contributing to the environmental preservation, conservation, as well as they are interacting with the environment in a favorable way. Say, mangrove forests, they are respiratory system, you can say, of the oceanic shores. So these mangroves will be inundated, and so the fertile marginal zone, fertile zone at the margin of the ocean, it will be completely inundated. So it would be habitat loss, it would be loss for the biodiversity, it would be loss for the favorable environment in which human beings were thriving, the fruit of which human beings were reaping. So here you see that the carbon dioxide, 90% of the heat and 25% of the carbon dioxide, the ocean has got the ability to accommodate it. It can act as a sink, and these changes are leading to the rise in the sea level, the bleaching. We shall discuss the bleaching. Then there is a threat of toxic algae. Change in the physicochemical characteristic of the oceanic water will lead to the thriving of the toxic algae. Algal bloom of a negative type will take place. It will adversely affect the availability of the food for the marine animals. Then it will also lead to the habitat changes. Acidification will have adverse impact, dire impact on the shelled animals, say for clams, for oysters, for those animals. We are having shells made up of calcium carbonate, the carbonate, what you say, the marine biodiversity hotspot, the coral reefs. The coral reefs, which are euphemistically called the rainwater forests of the ocean, they will be adversely affected. And you know, they have got, if you take them at the percentage of the total oceanic area, they are about hardly 1% of the total oceanic area, even less than 1%, and about 25% of the life flourishes, thrives in the coral reefs. So if coral reefs are threatened, the ocean biodiversity will be threatened in a big way, and it will have ultimate impact on the fisheries and all those aquaculture products which we harvest from the oceanic environment. So the acidification is a bolt from the blue. The ocean is facing the acidification, which is a big specter of change hanging over the oceanic environment. So what happens? How acidification occurs? The oceans are sink of carbon dioxide. Since more and more carbon dioxide is being produced in the atmosphere, the oceans are absorbing more and more carbon dioxide, and the rate of level of the carbon dioxide in the ocean is rising above its saturation level. And so the dissolution of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is leading to the lowering of the pH. So about 0.1%, 0.1.4%, 0.14% of pH has been lowered, and this lowering of the pH will lead to the increase of free hydrogen ions in the atmospheric, in the oceanic ambience, and that will combine with the carbonate, leading to the formation of the more and more carbonate, and so it will lead to the decarbonation, you can say, of the oceanic animals having shell. The process is well elucidated in this diagram. You can see here in the earlier times when the ocean acidification was not to that extent. This diagram shows the pH level, and so the lower concentration of carbon dioxide, lesser number of hydrogen, free hydrogen. You see carbon dioxide when dissolved in water, it forms carbonic acid H2CO3. It breaks down into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. So if more and more bicarbonate, if carbon dioxide is less, the concentration of bicarbonate ion will be lesser. Here you see carbonate, since it is a big source, big reservoir of carbon. It is not a source, but it is a reservoir. It is a big sink of carbon. That carbon is preserved in the ocean as carbonate ions. And these carbonate ions are taken up by these shelled animals which thrive in the ocean, and their shells provide them protection and they lead their normal life. So part of this carbonate ion is also going this way, forming bicarbonate. But here in this case, in projection to 2100, the pH of the sea water, you see it has declined a bit due to the availability of higher carbon dioxide, and the higher carbon dioxide has resulted in to the release of more carbonic acid. The carbonic acid is broken down into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. So here the carbonate ions which were in plenty earlier, they combine with the hydrogen, free hydrogen release. This is causing acidity. So this hydrogen plus CO3 double negative, they will combine to form more bicarbonate. So the bicarbonate concentration will go up. You see here that this arrow, that is the carbonate. Bicarbonate was also being formed then, but very small proportion of carbonate was going this way. And this thick arrow says that more and more carbonates were contributing to the formation of the corals and all other animal cells. But here in this diagram, when the level of carbon dioxide has risen, you see that this arrow has thinned. That is, more and more carbonates are being joined with the free hydrogen ions, and they are contributing to the formation of the bicarbonate, and lesser amount of carbonate is available for the formation of the cell. And that's why these shelled animals, they will face the heat, they will face the deficiency of the bicarbonate, their cell formation will be delayed, or they will be decarbonated, and that's how their life will be affected. There was one more point in this diagram, that is the bleaching of coral reefs. There is a Great Barrier Reef, a World Heritage spanning over 1,400 kilometers. These coral reefs are largest structure to be formed naturally by the animals. So these are spanning over 1,400 kilometers, and they, in their environment, nourishes a vast number of animals, and uh, they are contributing to the productivity of the ocean in a big way. So what is bleaching? What happens that when the destruction of the shell is taking place, that is, the carbonate concentration is going down and bicarbonate concentration is increasing. So the carbonate will be released and the heat is also being increased. That is, the water level, the ambient temperature of the water is also going up. So the algae, there is a symbiosis between corals and algae, and it is these algae which give the corals those characteristic color pattern, flourishing pattern, which attract our eyes. So these algae known as zooxanthellae, they will be released, and once this symbiotic or mutualistic association will come to end, what will happen? This coral will be losing its color, it will be bleached, and its productivity will go down. So the combined effect of rising temperature of the seawater as well as decline in the availability of the carbonate, leading to the adversely affecting of the coral formation process, will lead to the release of algae zooxanthellae from the coral reefs, and that will mark the end to the mutualistically beneficial association, and that's how corals will be bleached and their productivity will go down. And we can see these two processes, the acidification and over dissolution of the carbon dioxide, and ultimate effect will that the level of the ocean will continuously go up, and inundation of more and more areas under the oceanic water, and uprooting of we animals, we human beings from those areas, and ultimately it will affect our existence. It is not only that, but the ocean has a biggest impact, perhaps the ocean has the biggest impact on the weather conditions of our habitable areas, and if the oceanic composition, if the oceanic temperature, if the oceanic ambience is changing, it will have telling effect on our weather condition and on those animals which are inhabiting the lands. And since we are at the top of that chain, we will have to feel the heat ultimately. So we have seen in the past lecture that the global warming and consequently the climatic change is having all pervading impacts. It is affecting our health, it is affecting our flora, it is affecting our fauna, it is affecting we people, it is affecting or forcing us to migrate in search of new habitable areas. It is causing inundation of our habitable areas in which we had developed habit and in which we have developed, to which our economy was closely integrated, and that's why the problem is the big one. Rather, it is a overhanging catastrophe on the living world, on the whole living world, on the biosphere, not only the human beings. And again, while concluding, I will come to the coronosphere, and I will, as I have said earlier, I will correlate, we can correlate this climate change to the coronosphere, and had coronosphere been not there earlier, I would have said that it may also lead to the unmasking of many viruses which are at present time being covered by the nature in its deep swamp. But since the wilderness is shrinking and we are coming into the contact with those animals which were not hitherto under our contact, we will contract those pathogens, those contagions from these animals. What to say of these animals? There are zombie pathogens too. We have seen in 2010, due to the melting of glaciers, due to the thawing of the permafrost, a reindeer which had died and being preserved by the frozen ice had been exposed, and one virus was isolated from that reindeer, which might have played fall with the big population, which might have infected we people and leading to new disease which would have been difficult to control. So it is not that the living world will spread the virus. Even zombie viruses, even the viruses which are not in the realm of the life, they might also be exposed from the womb of the earth, and they will also affect us in a big way. So, my dear students, it is not that the climate change, it's the effect, it is not that the climate change is affecting one sector. It is climate change is all pervasive, and a big culprit of this climate change, a big, you can say, responsibility is this climate change is to be borne by we people, because it is due to our anthropogenic activity that the climate change has been triggered, and the addition of greenhouse gases leading to the global warming, and this global warming is also aiding to the climate change, including various actions and interactions between the different sectors of our different spheres of our living and non-living world. So we will have to face this climate change. It is not only that the students of zoology, botany and life sciences, they will have to be aware of the climate change, but all of us, literally all of us, even those who are dealing with the literature, they should also be aware of the climate change, and they should also disseminate the facts of the climate change. They should also contribute their might in alerting the population, unsuspecting population, uneducated population of the climate change through their poems, through their lectures, that, well, the earth is sweating and it is facing the heat, its fever is going up, and if we don't mend our ways, the days are not far away when we will have to run helter-skelter to save ourselves. Thank you. Thank you much for being with us. And let me, at the end, I should pay my obeisance to my teachers who were also with me, supporting me in my endeavors. They are the source of inspiration. They are undying fountainhead of inspiration for me. So I thank you, Professor, all the professors who have been associated, my gurus, my senior colleagues,